The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
It is a way that God condescends to us and gives us things, real things that we can see and taste and touch in our lives, and says, this is like, my body broken for you and my blood poured out for you. And you are nourished by this in the same way that I nourish your hearts with hope and joy.
Elizabeth Harwell's new book is The Good King's Feast, an invitation to the Lord's table. It's a picture book that helps children understand communion. Her previous picture book, The Good Shepherd's Pasture, is about baptism. Elizabeth and I sat down to talk about writing for children and what it means to invite them into a story that they're already a part of. Elizabeth Harwell, I'm so glad that you are on the Habit Podcast today. Thanks for being here.
This is so fun. Thanks for having me.
So you have recently published a picture book called The Good King's Feast. Mm-hmm. It's about the Lord's Supper. Mm-hmm. And this is a follow-up to The Good Shepherd's Pasture, which was about baptism. So these are two picture books that try to explain these sacraments to children. How did you decide to write books about sacraments for children?
Well, it wasn't really a decision. Actually, I never thought that I would be writing for children. So I ended up here slowly. So Andrew and I, my husband Andrew and I, made a physical move several years ago, which included a denominational move. So we moved from a tradition that did not practice infant or covenant baptism to one that did. And so, as I'm sure most writers do, I sort of process things by writing. So as I was sort of wrestling through, what does this mean? What do we think about this? What is this saying? I was also writing about it at the same time. So I had a blog for a while that was just for friends and family, and wrote this blog post after our second son, Charlie, was baptized, and sort of compared it to being in the pasture, the good pasture. So Andrew and I are being taken care of Jesus, who is our good shepherd. And our children, by nature of being under our care, are also being taken care of by the Good Shepherd. And so I sort of write about this saying, baptism is a way of showing and telling our children that they belong in this pasture with us. And that Jesus is singing these songs over us, and we are singing his songs back over them. And their baptism is a place to tell them that, to sing the promises over them. So anyway, so through this, I had people say, well, this is really helpful for me. You should think about turning this into a book. So this is a 5-year sort of just thinking, praying, getting connected to a publisher, and that coming out. And then after that book release, The Good Shepherd's Pasture, my publisher asked me to think about doing one on communion. So there would be a companion book. So anyway, so that's just how it came about. And that was an interesting sort of switch from the book on baptism sort of came out of me, something that I was thinking and processing about. And then to be asked to write something that from the outside, here, can you take this topic and think about it and write about it? That was an interesting experience. So,
yeah. Well, as a Protestant, you're now out of sacrament.
I'm done. No more books for me.
Yeah. Well, if you make another denominational move, you could have up to 7.
That's true. I'll talk to Andrew about that.
Yeah, right. So the language of faith is very often the language of metaphor and symbol. It's often figurative language, and yet children, they're doing the best they can just to sort of get the figurative meaning of things. So tell me about that. I mean, so you are, you're writing books, or you've written 2 books to help people who don't yet get figurative language in understanding these highly, these acts that have a lot of symbolic freight. They carry a lot of symbolic freight. I imagine you spent some time thinking about how kids make sense of metaphor, metaphor, symbol, and those sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of how we all make sense of things, right? I mean, we can't learn something new without connecting it to something that we already know. So yeah, I think for kids, metaphor is hard for them to make sense of, but I think we're always using similes with them. We're using similes with ourselves and with one another. So this thing is like this other thing. And so I feel like I do that all the time with my kids without even thinking about it. That's the way, we don't just give straight up definitions for things. We connect it to something that they already know. And I think, does the word metaphor, doesn't it mean to carry across? Is that
Sounds right. That sounds familiar.
Okay, we'll say that. Somebody can correct me later, but it's funny that the word metaphor is actually, has a metaphor in itself.
Yeah, right.
That's how we connect things. So I don't know. I just think that's such a privilege to almost literally get inside somebody's head and to carry them across, to make connections from one thing to another. So yeah, obviously the sacraments are much more than metaphor, but it is a way that God condescends to us and gives us things, real things that we can see and taste and touch in our lives, and says, this is like, my body broken for you and my blood poured out for you. And you are nourished by this in the same way that I nourish your hearts with hope and joy. And so, yeah, I think children are little people, right? So they learn the same way that we do. And so it's a privilege to be able to connect things for them, to condescend to them, and to carry them across.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a helpful distinction that you're making between metaphor and simile. So often, when I talk to grown-ups about figurative language, I'm usually not especially interested in the difference between metaphor and simile. It feels like, one has the word like or as in it and one doesn't. But I think you're exactly right that if you tell a child life is a highway, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. But if you say, this, life is like, well, okay, life is, that's just an abstract. But to say that, now I'm trying to come up with an appropriate simile for.
Hard to do it on the spot, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
This house is like a zoo.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Kids don't have any trouble with that.
Yeah, they're already doing that anyway in their heads, with one another. So that's how they're learning new things, is connecting it with what they already know.
Yeah, that's good. Well, That's helpful, because I was thinking this is a big challenge, but it's not any more of a challenge, for similarly, I don't think it's any more of a challenge for children than it is for grown-ups, really. I mean, I think it's clear enough that they don't, there are things they could miss in a simile that maybe we're a little better equipped to get. But anyway, moving on. There's also the matter of story. One of the things I love about what you do with the Good King's Feast is the way you place the Last Supper in the context of the story of the Passover and the story of the marriage supper of the Lamb as a way of connecting the Lord's Supper that happens every Sunday, or occasionally on Sunday, or depending on one's church, and then you're also saying, and you, young reader, are part of the story too. Guess that's not a question, is it?
Yeah. Well, I think when I was given this assignment to sort of think about the Lord's Supper and how to communicate it to children, I started thinking like, well, how am I going to say this in a different way? What do I have to say about this? And how do I make this mine and not just some assignment that's been given to me? And, as I started studying, I knew that I needed to start at the Passover as this sort of feast that starts and is brought more into its fullness throughout Scripture. And I was really just amazed. I don't know. I think for the first time I saw it as, okay, this was not just, before it was a meal of remembrance, it was a meal of promise. And so, when God instructed Moses to have his people sort of put this feast together, he said, to keep doing this. And he said, and when your children ask you, why are we practicing this meal? This is what you're going to say. So the promise that was woven into this story was, this is not going to be your last meal. I'm going to deliver you, because I'm telling you to keep doing this meal. And your children are going to survive this too, because I've said, when your children ask. So I just sort of loved that thought that, yes, they were to continue this meal and to look back and to be participants in this story throughout the generations, but they were also feasting on the promise.
Yeah.
And then, Christ comes and he sits at the head of this table, which is just sort of amazing. And so the meal comes more into its fullness as the Lamb of God himself is at this feast, and he sort of uses the meal to tell a new story of a new sort of deliverance that's coming. And in this meal, there's also a promise woven into it too, because he says, I'm going to eat this meal with you again. This isn't the end of the story. And so now we are participants in that meal, and I think what I really wanted this was like the thing that I wanted to bring to the table. Didn't mean to say it like that, but no pun intended, was that there is joy in this meal, that it's not just, I think I grew up, and to no one's certain fault, but grew up just seeing it as a meal of only remembrance, of only looking back at what he's done, and sort of confused about what I was supposed to do with that. Like you take your wafer and you take your little cup and you bow your head and you don't look around, and, you sort of do this performative remembrance, like will yourself to, like, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Imagining Jesus. And so then I kind of become the central actor of the story. But the promise is that we're feasting on this future meal coming, this promise that there's a rescue still coming, that there's a future hope, that we're looking toward this future meal with him. So it's a looking back at the promise that he has fulfilled for us, and it's looking forward of how it will come into its fullness too.
Yeah. Remember and proclaim.
Yeah, exactly. It's both.
Yeah, that's good. I heard somebody recently say that the church ought to be kind of a time machine.
Yeah.
That sort of gives a vision of the future,
Mm-hmm.
the kingdom, the future kingdom, and at the same time, it's a time machine to the past. Right, we're doing something here that's been happening for a long, long time.
Yeah, we tell the whole story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love. There's a picture in your book. And by the way, who's the illustrator for this book?
Laura Pennebaker.
Okay, Laura Pennebaker. There's a picture that has the Earth encircled by a table.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the equator is a table.
Mm-hmm.
That here's a table to which the whole world is invited to.
Mm-hmm.
I love that little picture. The subtitle of your book is, I think it's an invitation to the table, an invitation to the Lord's table.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you're telling the story, and you're saying to the reader, you've got a place in this story, right? This is a table that you are invited to, and that's one of the things I love most about this little book is it said, here's this story, and it's your story too. That's
right. Yeah. Yeah. That one of the lines in the book is that picture came from is that this table is as long as history and as wide as the world. And that was one of the lines that I sort of, fixed the whole book around, just that thought of people have been sitting around this table for years and years, and will continue. It's just such a sweet picture of, yesterday we recognized All Saints Day, and it was really beautiful to sit with our children at the table and talk about the saints that have gone before us, and to think that we will be those, one day that people are talking about, hopefully.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, yeah, just that our place in this story, it means something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can we, I don't know how to ask this question, but, this idea that we have a place in the story, that sounds, I don't know, that sounds like that's the kind of talk that could be, you could mean just sort of metaphorically, or just sort of just as a nice thing to say. And I think you're talking about something very specific and very, not just a nice thing to say, but literally this is a story that we have a place in. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have anything more to say about that, but
yeah. Well, we continue to be participants in this. When we're at the table, we're saying Christ died for the world, but he died for me. Mm-hmm. And so that is my place in the story, that it was a particular redemption for me. Mm-hmm. And so we're telling ourselves the story that we have a particular place in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting to think about a storybook about communion, about the Lord's Supper for children, insofar as, again, you're saying we're telling the story that goes back to the Passover, that goes forward to the marriage supper of the Lamb, and you, child, have a place in that story, and that's kind of what I'm sure I know plenty of people could say this more clearly, but that's kind of what a sacramental view of the world is, to say there are larger things going on than what we see with our eyeballs.
Yeah.
Than what we sense with our five senses, and yet our five senses are a path toward, or a way of connecting to these things that we can't sense with our five senses, which to me feels very relevant to writing, to when we talk about the importance of Flannery O'Connor talks about the importance of staying on the surface as a way of getting below the surface. And I think a big part of the reason she talks that way is because she was a devout Catholic. And so, in the sacraments, here are these sensory experiences that somehow go beyond the sensory, which is also kind of what story does.
Yeah. Visible signs of invisible grace.
Yeah.
I love the way that Jamie Smith talks about, well, just about everything, but specifically worship. And I listened to a talk by him recently where he was talking about, our worship services, and he used the story that we've all heard this story before. Every preacher, I think, in the whole world has used the story about the man in the flood, and he prays and says, God, send, God's going to save me. Well, he sends a boat comes and he says, no, God's going to save me. And then another boat comes, tries to get him on. He says, no, I'm okay. God's going to save me. And then, the water's up to his neck, and a helicopter comes and tries to beckon him on. And he says, no, it's okay. God's going to save me. And then, of course, we all know he dies and gets to heaven and says, God, I thought you were going to save me. What happened? And God said, well, I sent you a boat and I sent you a helicopter, and what more do you want? But he used this story to illustrate our worship, and how so often we want these like big showy experiences, mountaintop experiences to feel the presence of God with us, and all the while God is saying, I sent you bread, and I sent you wine, and I sent you the word, and these sort of ordinary means of grace. But that's also just our ordinary everyday lives too, of the birds outside and flowers and, our child's face, and God, he meets us in these really ordinary moments. And those are the places that we sense his presence with us.
Yeah. And it's, I think it's such an important part of the writer's job to say, look, pay attention, right? Look at these ordinary things that are fraught with meaning.
That's right. Yeah. To give the airy nothings a local habitation and a name.
There you go. Yeah. Speaking of everyday, you have like 3, 4, how many kids do you have?
Just 3. Don't add any.
3 kids. And tell me about your writing life. How does that work with 3 kids being part of the church plan?
Not very well.
Yeah.
We've done different things in different seasons. There's been seasons where I've had a set time, one night a week where I've gotten away, or one morning. This was all pre-pandemic. That sort of turned things on its head. We haven't really gotten into a good rhythm. When I say we, I mean, I'm not talking about myself in the third person, but my family, we're all trying to figure this out together. What does this look like for mom to write, to be able to have space to write? So I don't know. Right now it's been more in just the crevices of life, staying up late to work on something, or, finding space where Andrew can help with the kids. And but yeah, it's difficult.
So it's staying up late more than getting up early for you.
Yeah. I do like the morning, but I don't write well in the morning. I write better at night.
Yeah. So, do you have a writer's group, or are there people in your life that you?
I'll give a plug for the Habit membership here.
Oh, okay.
This can be one long advertisement. I've never really lived like day-to-day life with any other writers. I never really knew that there were ordinary people out there who took writing seriously. So I guess it was a couple of years ago, I got involved in the Habit membership, and Oh, it's so good for me, and it's still so good for me to see other ordinary people who are taking writing very seriously as an assignment, and who are working at things. I've seen people over there who've been working on things for years, and sort of practicing that long obedience in the same direction. And that has been huge for me. And to see other people wrestling, for me to feel so lonely in the fact that I love writing, but why is it so hard?
Yeah.
If I love this thing, why it's just me. It must just be me that I can't do this thing that I love, but to see other people wrestling with that too has been really good. So, but out of that, I have Jen Disher, who is a part of the Habit membership. We realized we lived local to one another. So we do get together along with another local writer, every few months or so, and kind of, it's not really a workshopping place where we bring our works and sort of talk about it, but it's more just sharing what we're working on and praying for one another. And it's been really good.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you never pictured writing for children. What have you always pictured writing?
For adults, I guess. I don't know. I just really enjoy writing essays. I think that's sort of my sweet spot, is to just sort of process through writing what I'm thinking about, and wrestling with truth, and seeing where it ends up. That's what I really enjoy.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me ask you the question you know is coming. Who are the writers who make you want to write, Elizabeth?
Well, you know what? For me, it's actually the poets and the songwriters, which is funny because I write neither of those things. But I think I just love how we can memorize something and sort of carry it around, as something in our pocket to come back to. And that, it feels like such a gift to me to have a sort of phrase to carry around. So that makes me want to give that sort of thing to other people. But so poets, Wendell Berry, for sure, his collection of Sabbath poems have just really become part of our family culture. But I love the way he writes with patience and grace, and just sort of bridges earth and heaven together. And then Malcolm Guite is a favorite in our house too. His collection After Prayer, I just love the whole concept of that he took Herbert's poem and sort of unfurled it into just more poetry. And at so many of those points, actually, I'm staring at one right now. We have one, the church's banquet, up in our dining room. It become part of just my prayer life too.
One thing I love about After Prayer is that the George Herbert poem Prayer always kind of drove me crazy because there's no verbs in the whole. There's not a verb in the whole poem. It's like there's not a sentence in the whole poem. That just kind of, I was like, that's frustrating to me. As much as I love Herbert, I never. And then here comes Malcolm Guite and says, "Let me unpack each one of these little things that's not even a sentence."
Yeah.
But I'm going to take the phrase and turn it into a poem. And I'm like, thank you, Malcolm Guite, for doing that for me.
That's right.
And sort of, bringing to life a poem that I had very mixed feelings about.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That it is beautiful, that generative sense of I'm going to bring something else out of this. So maybe you can write after prayer.
That's right. I don't think I could improve on what Malcolm loved to.
Yeah. Well,
you said songwriters.
Yeah. Well, that list is so long. So just two I'll name that were really helpful for me in the writing of this book. I had a sort of playlist that I would go to when I was writing and would get stuck. So Sandra McCracken is one of those. I just love the way it feels like she's thrown her anchor into heaven and just kind of pulling us all along with her, just stirring up joy and hope. And so the We Will Feast song is something that I listen to a lot and probably has echoes in the book. And then Arthur, do you say it Alligood or Alligood?
Alligood, I think.
His album, The Shadow Can't Have Me. I have almost zero credibility to talk about songwriting, but I don't know. I don't think you can get much better than that. album. I just love the way he sort of inhales the 23rd Psalm and then exhales it as Arthur. I don't know him, but I can tell that is a very like earthy, feet on the ground. This is what the 23rd Psalm looks like in his life. And that makes me want to do the same sort of thing, to breathe in, the word of God and to offer it back of this is what it looks like in Elizabeth Harwell's life.
Yeah. I think Arthur Alligood and I might be related by marriage.
Really?
My wife was an Alligood, or in the Alligoods, South Georgia Alligoods, and he's from South Georgia Alligood, so I'm sure they're related. Yeah,
that doesn't seem like a very common name.
Yeah. I love what you're saying here about this idea of poetry that are poems and songs that give life to new poems and songs. And I'd love to know how many works of art have been started with "We Will Feast in the House of Zion." That song has been so incredibly important for the last few years, it seems like.
Yeah.
But in all three of those examples, you were really talking about breathing in something and breathing out.
Mm-hmm.
Breathing in Herbert's poem "Prayer" and breathing out after prayer, and and then Arthur's what he did with the 23rd Psalm, which really is pretty amazing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another author, I'll just say real quickly too, Madeleine L'Engle, her A Circle of Quiet book. She talks about this idea. She brings something to her husband that she's written, and he sort of says, well, somebody else has said that better before, which is kind of a funny response from my husband. Andrew's never said that to me, but her response back to him was, of course it's been said better before. Like, it's all been said better before, but I have to say it through me, and so I think that's really, what's happening here is this generative sense of course it's been said better before, but I can say it through me. The world hasn't heard it through me yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight as to how you get to that point where did you have to cross a chasm to when you made the realization that somebody's already said everything already, probably better?
Yeah.
How do you get from that realization to, and yet I'm still gonna?
Yeah. Well, I think it has to do with your central motivation for writing. I mean, I dropped this book particularly so many times because that was the thought of like, why am I the one doing this? I can't say this the best. Surely it's been said better, or somebody else in the future can say it better than I can do it. And so I would drop it. And inevitably somebody would say, hey, how's this project going? Or, hey, I just get through communion with my kids, and when's your book coming out? And so that sort of snapped me out of this and made me realize if I can drop the book and walk away from it, then that means that it's just at a cost to me,
Yeah.
That means my central motivation is just for me to fling this thing out into the world. But if I'm actually writing for my neighbor, if I'm actually writing for other people and I drop it, then it's at a cost to them too. So I think that's what sort of snaps you out of it is who are you writing this for? If it's for myself, then I want to say it the best. I want to be, say this better than anybody else has ever or will ever say again. But if I'm writing it to love my neighbor, then that doesn't matter. I just need to write the thing. Yeah, that's great. Well, Elizabeth Harwell, thank you so much for taking half an hour with me this morning. And I love your little book. And I didn't mean for that to sound. It is a little book. It's not. I don't mean that as that's your cute little. Yeah, it's a little important book. So thank you for writing it, and thank you for being here. Thanks so much, Jonathan. This was fun.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.